Hi again, everyone. And if you want to continue just putting in hello and where you're from, feel free to do that. So we're going to get started. Our webinar is called Let's Get Real, using performance-based assessments to authentically measure student learning. As I mentioned before, I'm Doris Zahner. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Council for Aid to Education, and I'm going to be the host and moderator for today. And we really appreciate everyone joining us. Today's webinar is brought to you through EdWeb and CAE. CAE is dedicated to improving student outcomes by encouraging educators to get a more complete picture of students' knowledge and skills through performance-based assessments. You may be familiar with our assessments of critical thinking and written communication, the CLA, the CCRI, or the SSA. So now we're going to get started with our actual presentation. So let's meet the panelists. First up is Mary Jo Connery, is the Associate Superintendent with Catalina Foothills Unified School District in Arizona. Next, we have Lisa Karlich, who's the Executive Director of the Periodic Assessment Group with the New York City Department of Education. And finally, we have Stacy Sparks, who is the Senior Director of Content and Design Development with CAE. Welcome to all of you. Before we get started with the discussion, we actually have a few questions in the polls that we want to ask you as our attendees because we're interested in knowing your experience, et cetera. We want to know what your current role is in education. Mostly teachers, assessment writer, we see, teacher. Great. Looks like that's slowing down. We have more than 50% of the attendees as teachers, and we actually have, I see students coming in. Really interesting. Thank you. This is about how valuable you think performance tasks are for classroom instruction on a scale of 1 to 5. And this is very interesting. Many of you, actually, those who have responded, a majority of you are saying that this is very valuable or valuable for classroom instruction. The next question, interested in knowing how valuable do you think performance-based assessments are for measuring student learning? Now, we're asking these poll questions because we're going to be discussing these issues with our panelists today, and we just wanted to get a baseline on the attendees, what your thoughts are on the usefulness and the value of performance-based assessments. Excellent. And then next question, are you currently using performance tasks in your classroom? Wow, many of you are. That's great. That's really, really excellent. I know that Lisa and Mary Jo are both very excited to share their experiences with you today. And then last question for this section. Are you currently using assessments in your classroom? Not just performance tasks as part of the curriculum. So panelists, I think we have an audience today that is familiar with this, which is really excellent because we don't have to get into the, details of this. So I'm going to hand this off to you, Stacy.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all out there. I'm just going to give a little overview of performance tasks, mostly as they're used in assessment. The definition of a performance task that we use is a tool for gathering evidence about what a student knows and can do. So both of those components. Rather than simply requiring a student to recall information or comprehend something that's given to them, a performance task requires them to apply the skills and the understandings that they've gathered in a context, such as solving a complex problem. A high-quality performance task is a meaningful activity. It engages students through the use of a realistic scenario, and it allows them to demonstrate important knowledge and skills. So why do we use performance tasks? One reason is that they are richer and more authentic than standardized tests that are made up of selected response test items. They tend to be more authentic because they resemble more what goes on in the classroom. Instead of having just disparate items, there's a task that links everything in a meaningful way and feels more authentic. Second, because most performance tasks contain a lot of constructed response items or elements, they allow for multiple points of view and varied responses, not just one correct answer. And because of that, they are often more equitable than assessments that only have a single correct response. Students are different, therefore they are allowed to give their own responses. Third, by having students construct their own responses and then asking them to justify or explain what they are thinking, performance tasks enable students to demonstrate the critical thinking processes and the communication skills that they're going to need to be college and career ready. So students often have to analyze, synthesize, and then communicate their thinking in writing or sometimes in speaking. Another benefit of using performance tasks is that they provide teachers with very useful insights into what students are thinking, how they approach problems, how they work through problems. As you know, in a typical selected response item, you can see if the student gets the correct answer, but not why they picked it, not the thinking behind it. And last, when instructors see the thought processes that students are using to get to an answer, they're better able to adjust their instructional next steps. They know what students have truly understand, and if there are some sort of confusion or some sort of missing step, they can help to fill that in. So those are all benefits of performance tasks. A few real-life examples of completely authentic real-life tasks are here: designing and conducting a complete science experiment, writing a research paper, performing a gymnastics routine. But there are also performance tasks which can condense these kinds of activities into a shorter, easier to administer and easier to score activity, such as giving a student a real-life science scenario, providing them with information and data sets, and then having them come up with a written solution to a problem. Different kind of performance task than conducting an experiment. Performance tasks differ in many ways. They differ in their focus. Some performance tasks focus on generic critical thinking skills. Others focus on specific academic areas. Their purposes vary, whether they're used for, say, a summative assessment or a periodic assessment. And the kinds of actions that students perform within the task can vary. Reading and writing, listening or speaking, viewing videos, drawing, making something. However, although performance tasks vary in so many ways, there are 5 key features that generally apply to all high-quality performance tasks. The first of these is that they measure tasks at high cognitive complexity. So instead of focusing primarily on what a student already knows, or basic comprehension, they focus on higher level skills, such as the ability to integrate information, or analyze, or evaluate. Performance tasks usually are integrated measures of multiple standards or claims. So instead of having, a set of maybe 50 items, each of which focuses on a different standard, or clusters of which focus on different standards, A performance task tends to integrate measure of multiple standards or claims. A high-quality performance task is coherent. It's a coherent set of actions that generally culminates in some sort of extended response. So it might begin by a student might read a short text on a particular subject, answer a question about it. Then the student would get another piece of information, another text, or perhaps a video, and that's linked in some way to the first text, and answer more questions about that. And then at the end of the task, the student integrates everything that they have read or listened to or thought about in some sort of extended response, like an essay or the solution to a problem. A high-quality performance task is meaningful, it's engaging, and it's open-ended. Usually a performance task focuses on some sort of scenario or problem or theme, and that's not chosen randomly. It has to be something that's going to be meaningful to students, meaningful in the context of the content area or the skills that are being assessed, and something that's really going to engage students. They're going to spend maybe, half an hour on this task. And a high quality task engages them. It's something that they find exciting and important. And finally, it needs to be clear and complete. Students need to understand exactly what's being asked of them. They need to have all the information clearly presented to them that they're going to synthesize or respond to. And it has to be very clear. So now we are going to move on to our panel discussion with our two panelists. And we're going to start by talking about the challenges and successes of their work with performance tasks. So I want to start with Lisa Karlich and ask about a short history of how you're using performance tasks in New York City and some of the challenges and some of the successes that you've experienced there.
Thank you, Stacy. And welcome everybody. I love talking about performance-based assessment. It is a passion of mine. So periodic assessment here in New York City provides multiple types of common formative assessments that schools can choose to use across the year to monitor student progress and student learning. And a large part of our portfolio is actually dedicated to performance task assessments that you described, sort of more of the contained performance based assessment that you were talking about. And we started that program in 2013, and it continues to evolve to this day. We're constantly adding grades and subjects. And so we currently offer them in a variety of grades and subject combinations, but all across grades K through 12. And that includes English language arts, Chinese language arts, and Spanish language arts as two of our highest incident languages, of course. And then there's math, science, social studies, visual art, physical education, and we offer these in various combinations 3 to 4 times over the course of the year, depending on the grade subject. And schools have flexibility to decide which ones they're going to use and how many times they're going to administer over the course of the year. And that's because with 1,600 schools, over 1,600 schools, we have to provide a lot of flexibility and options, obviously. And so with that volume, our design for our tasks really focus on high leverage skills in the content area that would be the major work of the grade, regardless of what curriculum is going to be used, right? So from our perspective, when we're providing options to schools, schools are using different curricula depending on what their needs are. And so we have to figure out how to provide a performance task that can seamlessly fit within that curriculum. And so focusing on those high leverage skills that are so tied to that content area is the choice that we made as far as a development standpoint is concerned. And so each of the tasks, as we design and develop them across the year, they're all scored on the same rubric based on that grade and that content area. So you can really show growth over time of students. So that's sort of a little bit, very quick snapshot of our design and our program. I would say the biggest success that we've had is the involvement of our educators at multiple levels and over multiple years to provide feedback that lead to improvements and the evolution for the instructional utility of these materials. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that later, but it's really the listening to educators and being able to advance and evolve the design over time. That is what allows us to shift instruction over time. So the incremental changes in the task program provide opportunities for educators to shift their instruction that's very tangible and manageable over the course of the years. And so performance based assessment really provides that signal to instruction, as a lot of assessment does. But in this case, that move towards developing skills and application and a way of thinking about issues and problems instead of just specific content. Uh, Pieces of knowledge, right? And
Right.
so having educators involved in that process lends a practical validity to the task program, and that actually has resulted in over 1,000 schools adopting the performance tasks in some way annually. And I would say the biggest challenge would be scoring, and I don't think that's going to come a surprise to anybody on this call. Scoring on two fronts, right? Like norming that meaning of the rubric and what constitutes quality, and then just the time it takes to do that scoring for open-ended assessments.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great. Mary Jo, I had the same question for you. If you could just give us a little bit of a background of the experience in Catalina Foothills and the challenges and successes that you've experienced there.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome everybody. We've taken on the goal of developing performance tasks as a single district, not part of a statewide effort like Lisa explained, but we've been at this work since about 2005. That was the time when we decided to bring the community together and help us identify what they consider to be 21st century skills that students will need not only as they're with us, but beyond us when they go out into the workforce and into their own lives. And so we call those 21st century skills deep learning proficiencies now. But once we identified them and as we evolved through each curriculum revision process, we saw the importance of being able to measure learning and measure it in a different way. As part of our strategic plan beginning in 2009, our focus was on learning for transfer. And so with a focus on learning for transfer, we realized then that performance tasks needed to become part of our common assessment lineup for the school district. And so with that, we began several years of large scale training across the district with our teachers. And at the time, we were using Mark Chun as the trainer and he used to be with the CAE, and he was doing trainings all around the country on how to design performance tasks and had a specific methodology that he was using in his training. So we used that methodology as we began our work. And then as we began to work more with Jay McTighe and adopted Understanding by Design as our overarching framework, and began developing annual plans and unit plans using Understanding by Design, then we merged the work that we gained from Mark Chun's training with Jay McTighe's work, and we now have our own template for the design of performance tasks. So we have been at this for quite a while, and it's highly teacher driven. As Lisa mentioned, involving educators in the process is extremely important. We don't have to worry about buy-in, so to speak, because our teachers are they're being trained in the process. They are part of the design. They're part of the field testing, and then they're part of the revision work around these authentic performance tasks that we're designing in an ongoing way. The other thing that we found that's really important is to ensure that the performance tasks actually fit in nicely with the curricula that they are teaching, so that they don't appear as something extra on top of everything else that they're doing. We've been able to integrate the performance tasks into the everyday assessment process that we use throughout the school year. So we've been at this pretty much full speed since 2009, after the identification, of our 21st century skills, our deep learning proficiencies, and it's just an ongoing process. Some of the challenges have been that this is a very dynamic process, and once you have a performance task in place and standards and or content changes or just things in the world change, we find that there is a need to revise these tasks and make them more relevant for the students. And so it's never ending, is what I'm saying. It's a continual process that is ongoing every year with different subject areas, depending on which curriculum revision we're going through at the time. We currently have performance tasks in science and social studies, math, ELA, writing area, and health. And so we bring teachers together that have been trained. We train them in rubric design as well as the performance task assessment design. And we spend a lot of time together researching specific content that we might want to incorporate into these performance tasks, but then also include a measure of our deep learning proficiencies. Those are our skills such as critical thinking and problem solving, communication, collaboration, systems thinking. We want to incorporate those as well. So that and then the common scoring process, because whenever we design a performance task, we want to bring groups of teachers together to go through common scoring, so we can ensure that our rubrics are valid and that they're measuring what they're intended to measure. And then if we find there's flaws, we then go into a redesign process with that and then start the process all over again. But it's very exciting. The teachers love being a part of it because having them as the design part of the design process is really important in terms of the implementation. Some of the successes that we've had is that our teachers really like to be involved in it. So we have no problem at all getting teachers to, when I say volunteer, to participate in these processes. When they work with us, whether it's during the summer or during the school year with substitutes, any work that they're doing with us outside of school hours or during the summer, we pay our teachers for this design work, and these tasks are vetted, and they go through a very specific process before they're field tested, and then we use them and score them together. So because of the teacher-driven process, we've been very successful with it. And then I just want to mention that since we've started using these in the different subject areas, we've seen a lot of growth over time in terms of measuring learning for transfer, because the purpose of these tasks is not to provide them with a familiar context that they may have been taught, as part of their curriculum, but to have them apply skills that are in a non-familiar or a different context than what they may have learned in the classroom. And so we've actually seen growth over time. We actually start these performance tasks in first grade, and they're in first grade all the way through high school. And so we're able to look at that growth over time. And when we report out to our community and our governing board every year on how our students are doing, we don't just focus on standardized testing. That is one assessment, one time a year. And we also focus on our performance tasks and talk to our governing board and community about how our students are doing on that. One other thing I will just add is that you can get really good at comparing yourself to yourself. And what we realized after several years is that we wanted to have an external assessment to see how we're doing on measuring and teaching for transfer outside of our own assessments. And so we did begin with the CWRA, CWRA Plus, now the CCRA Plus, about, I want to say 11 years ago. And what I will say is that our students have done very well on those tasks. And once we had these performance tasks in place from grade 1 through high school, we started to really see an improvement in our CWRA plus scores, and the students came to expect performance tasks year after year. And when they would start taking the CWRA plus, it's gone through several name changes now, as ninth graders, they were like, oh, we're used to these. I mean, that's what they would say. We're used to these. And they ended up performing, our freshmen were performing very well as our juniors and our seniors. So that's just a little bit about what we've done, but we find them highly valuable in terms of measuring for transfer and measuring for those important skills that students need to apply outside of the content area, such as critical thinking, collaboration, communication, etc. And one thing that we always incorporate into our task is collaboration, because we know in the real world, people work together. And so a lot of these tasks aren't just individualized and taken by one person. We always incorporate some piece of collaboration in the task, never the end product that the students have to design or present to represent their learning. But we want our students to know that collaboration is real, and it's part of what they're going to be expected to do, not only in school but outside of school. So we've always included a piece of collaboration in every task.
Yeah. That's great.
Yes, actually, now that we've talked about challenges and the successes, and we've heard from Lisa and Mary Jo, we want to know from the attendees, what have been some of your challenges or implementing or getting this implemented in your district or your school? Class time, it looks like. And the time to create one is the second most frequent challenge, followed by too many requirements. Yeah. But interestingly, cost is only only 2%. It's the very last one. Thank you. I'm going to close this poll. And now, Stacy, back to you.
Great. Yeah. So, Mary Jo, I would like to have you start the next question. What kind of response have you gotten from educators, parents, and students to your use of performance tasks?
With educators specifically, the feedback that they've given us and about the length of time that it might take to deliver, an assessment, the assessments themselves, we've gotten a very positive response from. But in the very beginning, some of our tasks were too long and took, too many class periods. And so our tasks now are meant to only take one class period. And because they are authentic and assessing skills that are part of the curriculum that they're teaching, as well as our deep learning proficiencies, such as critical thinking, collaboration, etc., they've been much more pleased with how they're integrated into their curriculum. Because now when we design units and annual plans, we automatically include the common performance tasks that we have as a district at the different grade levels, in there. So the response has been much better once we shortened them to only take about a class period to take on the part of students. Our students, it's become part of the culture. I mean, I don't know, I think if they went a year without taking without having to respond to a performance task, it would seem odd. So over time, we've built a culture around performance tasks, and performance tasks have become our district common assessments. So we have other things that we might do for benchmark testing, but it's the common assessments that the common performance assessments that we really pay attention to, because those are the assessments that measure for transfer. And I think our parents too, they just see this as part of the culture in terms of our assessment process and a multifaceted assessment process. But we do focus on this because we don't want our students testing all the time. So the common performance tasks are what the district uses to measure learning for transfer versus, other kinds of weekly or biweekly assessments. We leave that up to our classroom teachers and their teams. And we use these common performance tasks to look at long-term learning across all of the grades in our school district. So I would say overall, the response has been positive.
Sounds
And
very
again, that's
positive.
because our teachers are involved in that
Yeah.
process.
Thank you so much. Lisa,
Yeah.
what kind of response have you had to the performance
I would
tasks that you've been
say,
using?
yeah, I would say very similar to what Mary Jo had shared. I would say that performance tasks, they just feel less like a test, right? And so
Mhm.
from that perspective, they come across as less intense for students, and teachers are able to provide more qualitative information around how students are doing in class, as opposed to providing a score. Um, specifically, and so it feels it allows to have that more authentic conversation around how a student is doing. I would say, again, going back to and I think our participants here have shared the time, right, like the time it takes to do this work well. And so I would say the biggest investment that schools have to make is around norming and understanding that quality grade level response, as it's described in the rubric, has been one of the biggest challenges, right? Like to for teachers, as they're scoring, to sort of separate out a right answer, or the idea of right answer and wrong answer, or looking for the right set of buzzwords from a text being pulled into a response, and really looking critically at what the student is showing you that they know. I think is sort of where a lot of the work lies. As again, as Mary Jo was sharing, there's a lot of training that should be incorporated in this work, and then there's always limited time, right? But the idea that the like, for example, like a math task is designed for students to be able to respond in multiple ways, right? Because it's very open ended, and divorcing the idea of a student getting the right answer from looking at how they're showing you they're getting to that right answer, is where that work lies, because they may not be demonstrating on grade level work. And so, as you're looking at that and you're looking at sort of the criteria in the rubric, it's really around, you know, how they're getting to that right answer is precisely
Mhm.
where that instructional work lies, because that's where you're figuring out what that student needs in order to advance their skills, to take on more and more complex work. Um, so I think it's positive all around, but there's always a ton of work involved, in being able to transform the actual taking, the design of the assessment, the taking of the assessment, the scoring of the assessment, and like what are the next instructional steps, really.
Great. Thank you very much. Um, so given the performance tasks, the kinds of tasks that you've described, how do they relate to college and career readiness skills, would you say?
Yeah, happy to sort of pick up where I just left off there, from the instructional standpoint, right? So we refer to the performance task program as really a trio of materials. There's the task, the rubric, and the scoring guide, and it's the scoring guide that actually provides the highest instructional utility, because it draws an explicit connection between the standards used to design the task, to the student work, to the criteria in the rubric. And so when we're looking at the student sample, that's annotated, right? We provide annotated student samples, that describe what it is in the student work that leads to a particular score. And that was very intentional on our part as a way to support teacher reflection on instruction and planning. Because if we're trying to prepare students for the non-routine work they're going to face in college and in their jobs, it's important that that experience in the classroom develops these skills, right? So that means reimagining how we're utilizing content in the furtherance of this skill development. So to use a common sort of refrain around students, always struggling with fractions, it's really not about reteaching of fractions. I'm a former math and science teacher, right? So I always go to the math example. But it's not reteaching of fractions. It's how did I teach fractions as a teacher, right? What was the impact on the student in learning? And if they didn't get it, as we move into the next set of units, because it's not just reteaching, it's taking this information and carrying it forth with you. as I move on to the next unit, where is there space in the next several units for me as a teacher to provide additional opportunities for different representations, and to go back to that to address the conceptual gaps that I know exist of parts to a whole, so that, because we know that that way of thinking leads to ratio reasoning and rates, and it becomes a tool for later in life to solve real world problems that students have, like analyzing their personal budget and their raise and determining the value of a major purchase that they're going to make, right, as well as any number of jobs in math and science, or even political science, right? So it's really about using the task as a reflective tool for teaching. That is just as important a lever as understanding what each student is bringing into the classroom, like where they are right now, right? We have to make movements in the classroom as well as using that information from the students. So from that perspective, I would say that the college and career readiness, again, as Mary Jo was saying, starting in grade one, starting in grade K, having that through line across the grades is really about reflecting on each grade level's sort of core tenets on those skills, because they build all towards grade 12.
Great, that's great. Mary Jo, if you could just give a few examples of how the skills measured on the PTs relate to college and career readiness in your district. And just one caveat, we're having all this great rich material. I do have one more question we're going to ask after this one, and then we want to make sure we have enough time for the Q&A period. So that's just where we stand.
As I mentioned earlier, we brought together a team of people from the community, our parents, high school students, the university, entrepreneurs, businesses, to help us identify the 21st century skills, deep learning proficiencies that we wanted to focus on. And so we have those, and we have focus skills for every grade level, even though teachers are working on all of these all of the time. Excuse me. But we always include a measurement of these skills in every single performance task. And we have a rubric and a continuum of rubrics that have been designed over time for K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12, so that teachers can actually measure these skills with their own classroom assessments and tasks that they're creating with their team colleagues or on their own. Because we realized early on that in order to really measure these skills and measure them over time, they can't just happen once in a while. It needs to be something that is ongoing. And so having these rubrics, which we post on our website and make available to everybody, has been really helpful. And they've gone through many revisions to get to the point where they are now. But having all of those people help us identify the skills that our kids are going to need, not only while they're with us, but when they leave us, was very helpful in determining what skills we were going to focus on, and defining those skills and what they look like in the real world. So in answer to the question, how do the skills being measured, represent them? We are measuring them, and the kinds of authentic tasks that we put students into requires them to do analytical thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, to collaborate, to communicate their response well. And then there are rubrics that are designed to measure the success of that and to inform practice where there might be areas where students need to make improvements.
Thank you. All right. Finally, what message do you have for educators who are seeking to either incorporate performance tasks in their school for the first time, or maybe increase it or do so in a deeper way? Any tips or advice that you would give, Mary Jo?
Well, the first thing that I would say is to start small and not to try to do every subject area all at one time, or have different disciplines work on this, but to start small and think about designing one, task and see how it goes, and to be sure that teachers have the time for the training as well as the time for the development of these tasks. And again, to think about how you can embed these tasks into the instruction that you're doing throughout the year versus layering on another set of assessments on top of the other assessments that you're already doing. Have it become part of the normal assessment process that happens throughout the school year. We've found that providing time, training, and that includes time and training for common scoring, rubric development, as well as performance task development, and showing our teachers that how much we value their expertise and their work, and paying them for their time outside of school or during the summer if they're doing this work at those times as well. But embedding them into the curriculum has been one of the biggest successes for us, instead of adding another layer of assessments, and ensuring that these assessments are meaningful, that when you take the time to out of your class time to administer them and use them to inform instruction, that they are very meaningful and actually provide very useful data for the teachers to use in terms of informing instruction. So those are just a few of the things that I would recommend.
And Lisa, what
Yeah.
about you? Do you have any recommendations?
I second what Mary Jo said, and very quickly, I would just say that the work of this work is in the evolution of it, not the end point. So start with rethinking how to evaluate a set of skills. Start small, as she said, and there, because there's the gold standard of performance-based assessment, and then there's where you start. And so, it could take years to get to what you really want for your context, but that shouldn't stop you from taking the first step.
Great. So I'm hearing start small, make sure you embed within the curriculum, and allow plenty of time for training as well as for development. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for answering all the questions. And now we will move on to the Q&A.
Great. I have a few questions that the audience has posted since we had this discussion, and they're great. There are a few of them in here regarding the assessment being used for summative or formative. Would either of you like to just talk a little bit about how you use these performance assessments, what capacity, and then also as part of that, whether it's used for accountability purposes?
Well, in our school district, we use them as summative assessments, and so they're used at the end of units or at the end of some large sequence of instruction, because we've embedded them into the curriculum. They have their place throughout the school year, and the teachers decide. The teachers actually decide how they're going to organize their standards and units. And that can vary from school to school. They're all working towards the same end outcomes, but where they place their units might look different. So ours are summative in nature, and the teachers and their teacher teams might create other types of performance tasks that they're doing on a more formative basis. But the ones that we use to look at growth over time across all the grades are summative. And with regard to accountability, we use them, as I mentioned earlier, to report out to our community and our governing board, because we want our community and our governing board and our parents to understand that a state assessment given once a year can't be the only measure of accountability. It's all the other things that happen with teachers and students all throughout the school year. And that's why we include how our students are doing on these performance tasks when we report out to our community every year on how our students are doing with respect to their progress and their achievement.
We are the flip side of that. So we're a formative assessment team. And so our tasks are used for formative and instructional purposes. And I'll go back to what I had mentioned earlier. They are provided specifically as a common assessment to provide an external check on the curriculum and how things are going, right? So it is that novel experience and that transfer of skills from, doing a few months worth of teaching to how our students adopting and integrating these standards into their problem solving and critical thinking, and applying it to a novel experience. And so they're designed to provide opportunities for teachers, grade level team teachers, and department level teachers to have a common text by which to have that conversation around teaching and learning and planning.
Great, thank you. Next question is about the process of developing. So, what is the process and framework for ensuring that these assessments and these actually the tasks themselves are culturally responsive, equitable, and fair for students?
Um, I don't. Well, I can start. So we try and have a lengthy timeline, right, in order to be able to go through a number of rounds of review with a number of different stakeholders to be able to collect feedback on the development as it's going. Um, through the process, so that we are responsive to feedback from through multiple lenses. It is an evolutionary process, right? And so with each iteration, we get better and better, and we make tweaks along the way. Um, Mary Jo.
Yeah, we have a very distinct process that we use for the design of our performance tasks, and a lot of it begins with a discussion and a brainstorming around what it is we're thinking about doing when we create this task, and we use our field testing process
Mhm.
to ensure that that we're providing an assessment that is accessible for all of our students. And so we get feedback from teachers, and then when we go through the common scoring process, we're able to see where we might need to make revisions based on student responses or a student lack of understanding regarding what they were supposed to do with that performance task. But it is evolutionary and ongoing. But we have a very distinct process where we discuss, how to make these assessments accessible to our students, and then the field testing process as well to collect feedback and make revisions as needed.
Right. And I should
Thank you. Go ahead,
oh,
Lisa.
no, I was just going to say the structure, right? The assessment needs to be aligned to the task itself, right? Needs to be aligned to the rubric. So the rubric is fairly the rubric changes less from year to year, right?
Mm.
Than the content of the task. So those are two different types of development.
Yeah, the same for us
A
as well.
follow-up question just came in regarding this discussion. It's what happens if a student does not meet the standards that are set forth?
Well, there's more than one opportunity for students to um, perform these tasks. There isn't just one a year. There are multiple performance tasks across other disciplines. But when the teachers do the common scoring, they look for patterns and trends in terms of student performance. And then they decide whether this is a result of the performance task itself, or if there are particular skills or concepts that students need to have reteaching in, and these things will come up over and over again. But again, our tasks are multidisciplinary, so to speak. They're not tasks that are just assessing specific skills like in science that they're getting that year. There's multiple skills that are being used to actually get to an end product in these tasks, and they have lots of experiences um, to participate in them. So we look at the results, but the students have multiple opportunities to do these tasks, and this isn't going to impact them, passing to another grade or not. It's really to give us good information about what our students need in terms of skill development.
Right. And the only thing I'll add is that we have vertical alignment in our rubrics. Um, and the tasks are designed to be on grade level. So the expectation when you take a task at the beginning of the year, when you're doing a performance task at the beginning of the year, you're not expected to be meeting standards because those are the standards of the grade that you're in. So the rubric should be showing growth over time. And
Mhm.
if a student is already showing those skills on grade level, there's opportunity in that rubric again for that student to grow, because the way the task is designed, you can show above grade level thinking. And so that vertical articulation across the rubric is really important because it's a continuum of learning, and that's how the student work is looked at, right? And so what do I need to do as a teacher to keep moving that student forward, regardless of where they are?
Thank you. Another question actually regarding performance assessments. Do either of you in your districts collect evidence on whether students who do better on these assessments actually have better outcomes for other things like college entrance exams, for example, or GPA?
So I'll defer to Mary Jo here because our assessments are formative in nature, and so we don't necessarily do as in depth an analysis, right? Because it's the information is at the classroom level, at the teacher level, in order to inform instruction.
Yeah, what I can say is that prior to COVID, that we started looking at um, the results of our students on their performance tasks in relation to how they are also performing on the which was the CWRA plus, now the CCRA. So we were looking at our results in relation to how our students are performing on those assessments, and saw a correlation between the success on those and the results of our students who were taking that assessment external to us. And it was very important for us to also to look at something external in relation to our own assessments. We haven't specifically looked at it in relation to GPA, but what I can tell you is that when we look at when we look at the success of our students on the external assessment that we're using through the CAE, and our own performance tasks, we find that our teachers tend to be a little bit more strict, in assessing them. They're basing it on the rubric, but it seems to be that our students, they're finding places for our students to improve all the time on these tasks, and which is what we want. But when we look at our student results outside of that on external measures, they're doing very well. We haven't tied it specifically to GPA, but we have looked at it in relation to other external assessments based on results of our students coming through the system.
Great, thank you. And then one last, it's not really a question for you to really answer in terms of opinion, but there have been several questions from the audience about whether they can see a sample or an example of your tasks. Is there somewhere that you publish this on your website or make it available for people?
Well, I'm always willing to share a sample if somebody writes to me directly, but we don't publish them on our website because they are summative tasks for us in our district, and we use them as assessments. And so we wouldn't want them to be published on our website, but we have worked with school districts around the country, and we also worked with Ed Leader 21, which is now Patel for Kids, and have done a lot of work with them and presentations with them. And when people have wanted to see a sample of one of our tasks, we're more than willing to share them. And I will just say that it is really a growth process over time, not just for our students, but for our teachers and the work around the development of performance tasks. It is just an ongoing process that requires review every year. And so it's just part of the work. It's just part of the work that we do as a school district. But yes, we can, if somebody was to write to me specifically, I'm more than happy to share a sample.
And same for CAE. If anyone's interested actually in the college and career readiness assessments, we have sample tasks that we are happy to share. You can go to our website and put in a request, and we can give you a sample performance task, which is what Mary Jo was talking about earlier. I'm afraid that's all the time.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say
no,
the one request that we get the most is what a performance task might look like at first grade, or second grade. And so we do share that, and they're just delightful, what we've designed for our young children.
Great. So I'm afraid that we're out of time. This hour went by so quickly. We really appreciate everyone's participation in the webinar. And once again, a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their experience. And we want to thank you for attending today and the work that you do each and every day with your students. We are here to support you with performance-based assessments. As I mentioned, like the college and career readiness, if you're interested in seeing a sample, please write to us and we'd be more than happy to send that to you through our website. And thank you again for your participation and hope you have a wonderful day.